and welcome to the program. This is Daily Politics coming to you live on Trust TV. Compliments of the season. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Abdullahi Ahmed. Tonight on the program, we examine the visit of Ghana's President John Dramani Mahama to President Bola Ahmed Tinubu as talks intensify over Nigeria's negotiations alongside the ECOWAS with the AES alliance and the broader implications for regional stability across the West African region. With growing security concerns and shifting diplomatic ties, what does this meeting signal for the region's political and economic future? Well, let's start off with that visit with State House correspondent Kehinde Amodu detailing the visit of the Ghanaian president.
First visit of the Ghanaian president to Nigeria since his inauguration in January. Apart from appreciation for Nigeria's support, President Mahama is in Abuja to intimate President Tinubu on concerns raised in the course of dialogue with the breakaway states of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger.
To thank him for the honor done me during my inauguration, but also to brief him on a visit I made to the Sahelian countries, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, and to bring him up to date with some of the issues that I discussed with him. As ECOWAS chairman, it's my duty to come and brief him on some of the concerns that were raised there, so that we continue to see how to dialogue with those other countries.
President Tinubu agrees dialogue with the three countries is essential because of the security situation in the Sahel region, because of economic opportunities that abound in those countries.
I feel good that it's here in the first place, and I'm indeed very happy of the effort is made to have a bridge between the AES countries and the ECOWAS. It's not a bad idea for us because of the security situation in the Sahel region and what economic opportunity that we must embark to ensure security of life and properties of our citizens.
Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger formally withdrew from the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, in January, forming a new regional bloc, the Alliance of Sahel States. The countries recently agreed to deploy a joint force of 5,000 soldiers to combat terrorism, establish a regional investment bank, and have also launched a common passport. The two presidents believe the citizens of those countries must be the first beneficiaries of dialogue with ECOWAS. From the presidential villa Abuja, Kehinde Amodu, Trust TV News.
Well, this is, of course, the new normal now. The Alliance of Sahelian States has become another entity that ECOWAS has to contend with along regional integration as well as security-related conversations. And the president of Ghana there, who has been interfacing with some of the military leadership of these states, came to Nigeria to brief the president, who is the chairman of ECOWAS, heads of state and government, on these open channels of communication between ECOWAS and its former members. Well, join us now to further deepen the conversation around what this means for the region going forward is veteran diplomat Ambassador Haruna Warkani is joining us for this conversation. Ambassador, compliments of the season. Thank you so much for joining us on the program this evening.
Thank you, viewers, and hoping you had a good break of the fast.
Yeah. First things first, let's talk about this new normal. What do you make of it so far? I mean, just this January, it became a reality. I mean, we saw it coming. It was on paper going to happen. But when it happened, a lot of people felt really surprised that ECOWAS couldn't stop Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso from leaving the regional bloc. But what do you make of this new normal now, 2 months in?
Well, a new normal could be emerging, but I think it will be premature to say it is the new normal. There is something in the making. There's diplomatic shuttling, diplomatic maneuvering behind the scene all along since last year to still woo this leaders of the three countries of the Sahel to still come back. That's why ECOWAS kept the window open for possible negotiations and readmittance. However, that may not be as easy as it sounds, because the fundamental differences still persist. People in the new Sahel states are beginning to see the benefits of actually detaching themselves from ECOWAS and taking some decisions on their own. New sovereignty, let us say. Some steps have been taken that has begun to change the economic, political, social, even military settings of those countries. And even the civil population are beginning to realize that perhaps this difference didn't come early enough in the life of their governments or countries, because they never thought these countries could have survived a month without France. However, they have proven that this has become very possible, and going forward, you could begin to see new optimism. Therefore, if for any reason there is going to be a new norm which will include maybe their readmittance into ECOWAS, certainly it has to be time that can prove that, because these leaders for sure have made up their minds, and the recent activity they have taken will be the breakaway or detaching themselves from the Francophonie organization, which is the equivalent of the Commonwealth for English-speaking countries. They vehemently have now removed themselves from the Francophonie, and therefore, more or less, the last vestiges of a relationship with France has been broken. So, President Mahama, even before being inaugurated, had taken steps, I recall very well, to have visited Burkina unofficially as just a neighbor, particularly. And there were very good reasons for the choice of Burkina among the Sahel states. So now, in his capacity as president and neighbor of one of them, it wouldn't be surprising that the ECOWAS president, chairman has to designate him to still reach out. Now we can see clearly that ECOWAS has realized that there were mistakes, and to correct these mistakes, they have to eat their words, they have to re-strategize, and take extraordinary steps, because ordinarily, by now, staff of these three states would have been sent packing from ECOWAS, and similarly, other staff members who are also Nigerian, for instance, in some of these countries, would have been sent back home. But you can see there is still a no action status, waiting to see what could happen eventually. So ECOWAS remains optimistic to get these member states back into the fold. However, I think it will take a little more diplomatic activity and goodwill to assure these nations that, assuming they come back, with the situation that aggravated their departure change in ECOWAS, which is going to be very tall order, because it will require fundamental changes to the ECOWAS setting, as it were. And that is not going to be so easy, because what these people have clearly indicated are very strange situations that ECOWAS may find it very difficult to adopt as regional-wise new norm in this case, for them to come and settle in. But if ECOWAS says it cannot do, then you still remain a stalemate in a way that will define the relationship going forward. And how stable or volatile is the situation across the region right now, especially from the security standpoint? I know there's an economic side that we're going to explore in just a moment, but what do you make of the stability vis-a-vis chances of a volatile situation across the region? Yes, it's interesting. It's interesting to note that there have been security challenges facing these countries. However, we must also draw a distinction that these security challenges did not start with their departure from ECOWAS. These are historical security challenges that have been there pre the current scenario. The reason why France, for instance, justified its establishment of some of these military bases was the security situation. Ab initio, there had been security challenges from the Tuaregs, from some of the terrorist groups that have been operating across the Sahel, ISWAP, and many of them actually, many splinter groups of terrorists in different countries here. Now, France has battled with these terrorist groups in quotes, and there has been no success. So it is not strange to find today that these independent countries are also grappling with the same scenario that was there before. It is therefore not a new creation, nor a new reaction either of the two scenarios. It has been a legacy situation in these countries, and these situations might remain for some time to come, because if you pose the question, why has Nigeria not been able to defeat Boko Haram after some 20 years or thereabout of engagement, starting from Metetine actually, not just Boko Haram, going backwards a little, Metetine down to where we are today, quite a number of years, and we have been battling. Now we are supposed to have the best armies in this sub-region. We are supposed to have the most funded military and experience in fighting similar wars, guerrilla or otherwise, in other countries, restoring peace and democracy into some places. Suddenly here we are totally incapable of restoring security, safety, and tranquility in our own country. Therefore, it is not unique to the Sahel states, not unique at all. And this problem did not emanate because they left ECOWAS. No, the problems had been there before they left ECOWAS. The problems are not also going to go away by simply coming back to ECOWAS. Therefore, we must be able to dispassionately disentangle the seeming link of, oh, they are finding it difficult, or they are failing, or otherwise. No, that has nothing to do with the situation. It's a legacy problem that needs some solution, which are not yet coming. Two, we must appreciate and congratulate these countries that they have been able to survive some months after France's departure. France is not sleepy. France has been planning behind the scene to actually upstage these governments, all of them, the three, to make sure they don't stabilize, they don't succeed, because if they do, that will be a total and final sign that France was not needed, was not necessary in the sub-region. Therefore, France is going home to do everything it can to make sure that there's no stability, no security, no tranquility within this region, to make it look like because they are gone, things are bad. Yeah. That is not a proper narrative of what is actually going on. You know, France left in a way that people might not appreciate what is really going on. Can you imagine when they banned Air France from flying into the sub-region alone? France was losing close to $40 million every day for flights emanating or terminating within the Sahel states. For an airline to lose that kind of quantum of income for obvious diplomatic row that has broken out between one country and another is one of the greatest things. And Air France is like France's cardinal pinpoint contact with the world in a way. Beside the economy, it is a diplomatic presence that they cannot afford to lose, and now it's gone. So they have not been happy with that economically. And politically, France is more or less in a shell now, ashamed of itself that after so many years of subjugation of a people, suddenly they have found their voice, they have found their feet, and they have asserted their sovereignty over what was like seemingly impossible to do. And this does not end with the AES alone. It's reverberating across Africa to say, after all, it can be done differently. The so-called colonialism and neo-colonialism and what have you, the globalization and the rest of them, we can still do it on our own. Because what these AES countries have shown the world is that it is possible when you have a good leader or leaders who can take decisions, implement, and stand firm for it.
Are you saying AES is a success already, barely 1 year in?
In fact, it's more than a success, because if you take one of these countries one after the other, you would see clearly that here are countries that have achieved something that was unimaginable 1 year ago. When the coup occurred in Niamey, and we were here on another set of program, you know, when I said they are not coming back, we were very emphatic that time. They are not coming back, because the reason for their departure was so fundamental that unless you can change it, their coming back might be, comme si, comme ça, they would say in French, a bit difficult. And it has proven that they are moving forward. Now, see the master plan that the guy in Burkina has just reeled out of what the infrastructure outlook of his country will look like. In the field of agriculture, for it saying, instead of buying vehicles for legislators and other political appointees, it is better to buy tractors, which he did. In the mining sector, for the first time ever, Burkina is realizing what it ought to have as income from its mines, rather than sitting down for France to dictate how and who can mine. Imagine a country that France has a right to say, can company A or B cannot mine anything in this country without our permission. I mean, it's unbelievable. Now the country has taken back its mines. The country is exerting its sovereignty over how much it will sell, how it will sell, and to who it will sell.
Yeah, but there is also, Ambassador, you'd agree, a huge security challenge, especially with Burkina Faso. Let's just roll some clips there of the recent attacks by militant groups in eastern Burkina Faso, groups that have been linked to Al-Qaeda and the Jamaat al-Nasri Islam wal Muslimin, JNIM, and they took control of a military position in Diapaga, in the Tapua province in Burkina Faso's eastern region this week. So obviously, while all of the other good things that you say is happening continues to unfold, this is another reality that they have to deal with, right? Do they have the capacity to face this existential threat alone, or at least as a three-body group?
Okay, beautiful question. We must be realistic. One of the reasons why they advanced for even breaking away from ECOWAS was the fact that ECOWAS literally did nothing when these terrorists were overrunning their countries, taking territory, and destabilizing the population. It hasn't been a 1 year thing or 2 or 3. We have seen the emergence of some of these groups within the Sahel generally and within West Africa in particular, such that today we cannot even finish counting how many terrorist groups are we dealing with in West Africa, which means even the larger ECOWAS itself is unable to respond to these security threats. So when you talk of the Sahel countries, let us not jump into conclusion to say it's because they became Sahel states or alliance of Sahel states, that's why these attacks are coming. No, it has nothing to do with those things. Like I said earlier, these are attacks or terrorist activities or insurgencies that have been existing long before now. They may exist long after now because of obvious reasons. Now, the question of can the three come together to be able to confront these people, The answer is yes and no. Yes, in the sense that they have already formed a military alliance among themselves, leading to a seed of soldiers of about 5,000 to protect themselves from external threat, internal insurgencies, and what have you. However, those cannot be enough. And we must realize that the insurgencies that we see in West Africa, I think an anatomy of it will help us better understand what is really going on. These are insurgencies that are funded, instigated, motivated, supported by external forces out of Africa itself. And therefore, the sophistication, the quantum of funds available, weapons and weaponry and other accessories, diplomatic ties to some places have become obvious that for any country, alone or together, to defeat terrorism in West Africa, the approach must be totally different. And you see, there has been this complicity of some leaders in West Africa alleged to be linked to some of these insurgencies. And so, it's creating a very difficult scenario for this insurgency to actually be fought successfully. Therefore, the AES countries cannot be seen as if they are failing. No. For me, as a person, I disagree, because with or without them being in AES, these scenarios will continue. I also want to draw our attention to a fact that Burkina in particular, there was this attack, I have forgotten the name of the community, where soldiers were overrun totally. That was some years ago. Soldiers were overrun, and the army asked the question. The French soldiers who were supposed to be protecting the territories were there and nothing happened. That is to say, France's army was there, nothing happened. Similar event took place in Mali, where Kidal and Gao were literally overrun, and the French military bases were there. So now, even with the French military base and French soldiers present, these insurgents were able to overrun these countries or regions of the country. Now, it will therefore not be strange for the insurgents to be able to show that yes, they still have capacity to overrun certain territories. Therefore, it's a narrative that has always been there. It will probably remain there until a global regional peace is found to this problem. And the only way we can come close to peace, tranquility, and security within the sub-region would be if there was an honest approach to these things. But as long as allegations of connivance between some of these countries and some other entities continues, I think rooting out the insurgency in West Africa might be very, very difficult to really come by.
So, Ambassador, if you have to qualify or characterize the relationship between ECOWAS and the Alliance of the Sahelian States, how would you describe it? Because most recently, the ECOWAS envoy, I believe, were in Guinea talking about the transition. I mean, Guinea has been under military rule for the past 4 years now, going into 5 years now. And, you know, they overstayed their welcome because they felt they were threatened and they had to leave. I mean, President Mahama obviously enjoyed some sort of civility when he visited. However, give me a sense of how this relationship is growing. Is it a mutual relationship with ECOWAS? What do you make of it?
Well, Guinea and Guinea-Bissau, let me take the two together, obviously are the sore points in West Africa in a way, because the real, would I say, belligerency that we saw culminating in the formation of the AES would have actually started in Guinea, because after the elections, the democratically elected government started molesting citizens, and the military were very uncomfortable with what was going on, and eventually, you know, it led to the coup that overthrew the government. Now, in the face of all that, ECOWAS was unable to do what generally the population expected of it. the response was like neither here nor there. Because the democratically elected president was a member of the ECOWAS Summit of Heads of State and Government, it becomes difficult for the group to tell him the truth.
Was ECOWAS not designed to have some instrumentality of checks and balances?
There are actually not just design, there are instruments of checks and balances. The protocol on good governance, for instance, the protocol on good governance and democracy. If you were to interpret the clauses of that protocol, you will see that ECOWAS is enjoined to ensure that, one, there are good elections, because elections are so critical, so fundamental to all these crises we see, because transition from one government to the other has proven one of the greatest albatross ECOWAS has to face with. Now, implementing that protocol on democracy and good governance has been, I think, the lowest point for ECOWAS, because governments will come through elections that were dubious and still be sworn in, and you have a government, so-called. Democratic institutions will be trampled upon, and nothing seems to happen. Electoral umpires are subjected to political will of whoever was in power, and nothing seems to happen. Opposition politics has become so intense that opposition parties have no voices anymore, because the moment opposition parties come forward to say, we don't agree with this, it is seen other than an opposition. And so governments clamp down on anybody who comes around. Therefore, freedom of speech and expression, association, etc., has been thwarted. And ECOWAS has not done much or expectedly what it should have done. This has led to all the failures of democracy in this sub-region, one country after the other, leading to whatever you can see. You remember the drama in Senegal, that a whole parliament can be subsumed to have been taken over, and the government of that day could take an opposition party leader, throw him into jail some few weeks to election and all those things, before finally the voices of the people said, no, Mr. President, you can't do that. Now, this is what has turned out to be in Guinea, and Guinea-Bissau in particular. Guinea-Bissau has become like, it has always been the laboratory for West Africa, because the number of coups, we have lost count of how many military and quasi-military civilian coups that has taken place in that country. They were changing government like you can change a shirt.
And then doesn't that make Guinea-Bissau now a cautionary tale for the expectations that people have about Mali, about Niger, about Burkina Faso, that it could go wrong, it could go horribly wrong?
Well, certainly that is very, very true, because anything can happen. Anything can happen. But the case of Guinea-Bissau in particular is there is an external, or let me say, fourth or fifth force, which is drug trafficking. The country is so prone to the influences of drug trafficking to a point where the government actually is determined by drug lords and not the citizens of that country. So the axis of South America, West Africa, Europe. So you have more or less a triangle where these drugs are moving. And the influence of this has been that you get to a country, you'll be amazed to walk into a country where you find SUVs more in number than any other thing you could easily find on the streets that are not even paved. But you could see expensive vehicles, expensive cars, houses, and lifestyles that are unimaginable for such a poor country. Therefore, the stability of the government there is dependent on some of these other issues, which might not always be in the forefront of discussions officially or diplomatically, but they exist, they pose a threat, and there were times when these drug pushers or land and drug laws will tell you they can remove the government any moment. And they have shown this clearly several times. So ECOWAS's position today will be such that you could see a very weak regional body, because for the government there to tell the delegation, you have less than 24 hours to leave my country. An ultimatum. Now, ECOWAS restored peace to that country, restored democracy, and what have you. Today, you wake up and the president of the country says, I remain president. The opposition said the former president. I think that was the turning point in all this. Right. So there is a jinx, let me say, for that country in particular, but ECOWAS need to do a little more, because if voices and actions are not matched across these countries, these problems are likely to continue and even escalate.
Right. So, I mean, we've been here before, right? These three are not the first to leave ECOWAS, but I reckon the first country to leave still has a somewhat favorable diplomatic relationship with the rest of the bloc. But talk to me about what ECOWAS is trying to achieve with the overtures of the visit by the Ghanaian president, for instance. This line of communication that we're trying to keep open. What, in your view, is the end game here?
Well, in a nutshell, the end game surely will be as brothers in a sub-region and in a regional bloc that has been the most successful in Africa, comparatively speaking. It was a big blow that a portion of regional micro bloc out of ECOWAS could just walk away, and walk away in such a way that they could tell ECOWAS point blank to its face to say, we are no longer interested in this marriage, in this relationship, and we are going, and they went. Yes, it's a big problem, and we hope some of these diplomatic shuttles by good and well-meaning West African leaders could possibly lead to some amelioration. But for total relinquishing of powers and acceptance to return, I have my doubts, very serious doubts.
Should it even be a part of the agenda, a return to ECOWAS?
Yes, I think that's what the diplomacy seems to be pointing towards. There should be a return. However, I think what we might possibly see would be a relationship that can be negotiated between the two blocs, such that some of the extreme situations can be avoided. For instance, there were some weeks back or months that travel was becoming a bit difficult between Nigeria and Niger on the border. Citizens were beginning to realize that the ECOWAS passport was not even accepted anymore. And some travelers and business people had difficulties crossing the borders. They had been delayed. They had been there on the border for so many days, something that was not known before. So these are some extreme situations that I think ECOWAS wants to also minimize as much as possible. And therefore, there could be a new working relationship with this body to say, okay, AES, you have gone, yes, we will have to allow you because we don't have a choice, but can we maintain a relationship, a working relationship that will remain open for citizens to enjoy business transactions across borders without much harassment and what have you? I think that's one of the planks of this shuttle visit that you can see.
To lower the temperature.
Yes. So at least, first and foremost, we must not forget that whatever it is, whatever configurations occur, we remain West Africans. The border between almost all these countries are such porous and almost non-existent, actually, on the ground. Non-existent. So for us to expect that because there is a new group formed out of ECOWAS, it will interpret it to mean we need visa, for instance, to visit the AES, or AES needing visa to visit us here, will be one of the most difficult part of this narrative that is emerging. So perhaps when some of these conditions are ameliorated in such a way that citizens might still be able to travel without knowing they are crossing into AES or AES crossing into ECOWAS, I think that will assuage some feelings.
Right. But I also reckon that it will be a security nightmare if you cannot track people based on certain available travel documents in this regard, especially if ECOWAS doesn't recognize AES passports, for instance, or the AES countries don't recognize ECOWAS passports, then I suppose it opens a window for all sorts of irregularities as well as security risks, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. But I think that's what the leaders are trying to, as much as possible, minimize by finding a way to say, okay, yes, we still remain West Africans anyway, generally speaking. Geographically, you can't change that. Whether you are AES, whether you are UEMOA, whether you are Mano River Union, we must realize that there are still some groupings within the ECOWAS sub-region that have formed alliances here and there, only that they have never declared to be sovereign on their own and take some certain decisions like travel, currency, military, and maybe diplomatic relationships. Right. So if this remains, yes, ECOWAS should be working towards trying to minimize possible friction points that could emerge. And if we succeed in that, we would say our leaders have thought well, acted well, and have given West Africans a leeway to feel a bit freer within this sub-region, which will enhance greater trade and cohesion.
Right. Let's talk about Nigeria's younger brother, Niger Republic. A couple of weeks ago, there were huge economic concerns about its energy sector. Niger is heavily dependent on Nigerian petroleum products, like petrol, for instance, and the likes. And we understand that they had some shortages. In fact, it led to a shutdown of filling stations across the border because much of the filling stations in the Katsina, Kebbi, Sokoto axis were being smuggled into Niger Republic because of this huge demand. We understand that that situation has been stabilized. But how do we use the economic front to regularize this new relationship? And do you see that being possibly the caveat that allows for these talks to be mutual, so to say?
Well, yes, they are, but let us also not look necessarily into the prism of just today, as it were, challenges that could come up to any country. Petrol shortages, generally speaking, Nigeria is just out of it like a year or two. We have been in it for 20 years or more. And it's been like a norm for us to see queues almost everywhere until recently. Now, Niger, yes, happened to have taken, I think, one or two decisions that were not necessarily right. Because for some time, Niger was able to be almost self-sufficient in petroleum products after the commissioning of its refinery. However, we understand what happened between it and the Chinese operators that led to these massive or drastic shortages, which resulted in almost chaos in the country. And Nigeria took advantage of that also to say, okay, well, yes, you have gone, but you can still come. Let's see what we can do. So, I mean, understandably, we have seen images of trucks leaving Nigeria as a relief to that country. The situation, like you said, has been stabilized in a way, and I think Niger would be able to come out of it based on its old practices of relying on its own refineries and what have you, because I think once the relationship between itself and China is fixed, perhaps the refinery comes back into operation, it will now stabilize the situation, and that scenario might be something like a forgotten past. But right. It brought up something that we are still together. Whatever happens, we still remain the same people. Now, let me tell you, no matter what government on two sides would try to say, for instance, as a dichotomy between Nigeria and Niger, the peoples of these two countries will remain the peoples that they used to be. The Hausa language, for instance, you can't remove it from these two countries. The cultural, traditional, religious, socio-economic affinities that existed for years and long number of years before independence of the two countries will remain there. And so trade, whether official or unofficial, will continue. That's why when you see trucks coming into Nigeria from Niger to ferry oil across, there was nothing anybody could really do. Yeah. Do we really have a frontier or a border between Nigeria and Niger? The answer, I tell you, is no. In some places, it's just like a bedroom. There's nothing like a physical barrier that can say this area is Nigeria, this one is Niger. Right. That's why even when ECOWAS took that decision to impose sanctions and take some measures, we did say the measures were not realistic because the peoples across these two regions or countries are the same people. France and its colonial counterparts in Europe drew a line across our own people arbitrarily with no historical, ethnic, or religious or whatsoever backgrounds to do what they have done and have divided people just arbitrarily. So we are having to contend with all those things today, and I think the new governments in these two places will have to live with a reality that yes, whether we like it or not, it remains so.
Okay. This past week, staying with developments in Niger, military ruler Abdurrahman Chiani converted to President Abdurrahman Chiani following the adoption of a new transition charter for the next 5 years.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? I mean, it's probably going to be 7 years before we may likely see another civilian administration in Niger. And they say this 5-year time period is flexible, depending on the country's security status. So it's not even a given that after 5 years there could be elections in Niger.
No, we shouldn't be expecting elections. We shouldn't be expecting elections.
Democracy is gone?
Well, it is. When democracy is badly handled, what do you expect? There must be something else to replace democracy. Military rule came and replaced democracy. People are happy with it. People are happy with it because when democracy is deliberately destroyed by the same practitioners, supposed practitioners of democracy, if you say it cannot work, then you should expect the opposite of democracy. And I think what we are about to witness is what has succeeded in some other countries across Africa, not just in West Africa now. If you cast your mind to a country like Uganda, after all said and done, Museveni overthrew the government there then, implanted himself, and declared himself as president after throwing down his uniform. Today he is there. He is not willing to go anywhere. He might not go anywhere. And this has also precedence in Cameroon, has precedence in Gabon, so many places, Angola, Mozambique, just name it. Now, Rwanda is like one of the latest examples of all those kind of a thing. By when democracy is destroyed by the same practitioners of democracy, I think that is what is, which is a lesson and an alert for all of us who claim, I use the word claim, to be practicing democracy. We are not, unfortunately, aware that there could be an alternative. So Niger has seen what it is. Chiani has changed because you said, ECOWAS said, for instance, there cannot be a military government that will be accepted based on the protocol on democracy and good governance. So, as long as you wear the uniform, you can be part of the ECOWAS Summit of Heads of and Governments. Now, he has transited outside of ECOWAS. The people are happy. For them, what they want is good governance, not democracy or dictatorship, as can be defined generally. So now the man is no longer in uniform, but he's giving the country what the country wants. The citizens are happier because their livelihood have changed. So for you to come to talk of democracy on the streets of Niamey, chances are that you might easily be seen as one of the enemies of the state. So politicians, this is a call to politicians across Africa that if you get elected, it is better to practice what the tenets of democracy teaches. Freedom of expression, freedom of association, freedom of speech, and the ability to cast the vote to change a government when and if the need arises.
Right.
Where this is absent, yes, I tell you, people will prefer military rule to democracy.
And on that particular point, when the Niger coup happened in July of 2023, right, the concern was that, listen, this could be the beginning of a new virus, because against that backdrop there was Mali, and then there was, Burkina Faso, and the likes of President Bola Ahmed Tinubu as the new chair of the ECOWAS head of states and government, tried to send a clear message with all the threats of military invasion and things like that. Do you think, in your view, that this virus has been curtailed?
No.
Or is there a chance that it is still simmering?
The virus is very much alive, very, very much alive, because the preponderant position of why the virus comes into existence in the first place is even aggravating across the continent. There is so much social discontent in so many countries as a result of bad governance, which was foisted on the people by a so-called democracy that cannot work. And so with that, the pre-existing situations are such that politicians are mismanaging democracy to a point where democracy might now be like an endangered species on the continent. Democracy is an endangered species because we will...
And is it too late to stop this scourge? Because you reckon, people still believe that the worst form of democracy is still better than the military dictatorship.
That is never true. That has been the popular saying, but it's never true, because we have seen benevolent military dictatorships that have enhanced the lives of people that they led better than when democracy came. Let's take the case of Nigeria, for instance. If you went round after 1960, First Republic, thereabout, almost all the major infrastructure in this country were actually done by the military. Since the coming of democracy recently, from 1999 to date, can anyone point something of significance in Nigeria, infrastructure-wise, that you can say the democracy constructed this new road from point A to point B in this country? None. What we have even not succeeded is to repair these roads to motorable state. 20-something years of democracy, and we as citizens cannot see the so-called dividends of that democracy. So the question is, why are people in power if you cannot change the lives of people positively?
Right.
Programs like free education, programs like housing, are all absent. People shout they are doing this, they are doing that, and when you look at it closely, nothing comes out of it. The politicians are getting richer, they are getting more powerful, they can't even listen, while citizens are wallowing in poverty. So with that is a recipe for the advancement of this virus. And believe you me, if we were to go out to the streets today to conduct a kind of referendum, will people prefer military rule to the present democracy in this country? Okay. People will vote for military rule, sure.
Right, okay. And on that very disturbing note, we're going to have to anchor the conversation here. Ambassador Haruna Warkani, as always, a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining the conversation this evening. We do appreciate you for your time.
Thank you for having me, viewers.
Right.
Thank you.
All right. And that is our program for you this evening. Thank you so much for joining us. Do not forget, you can join us tomorrow. We'll be back at 8 p.m. live and exclusive as always on Trust TV. Until next time, I'm Abdullahi Ahmed. Thank you for joining us. See you soon.